Good morning, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the Capitalist Cast. Joining me today is Representative Seth Grove. Representative Grove, could you tell us a little bit about your district?
Yeah, it's housed in York County. We have about seven state legislators who represent York County. I have kind of central western York County, so kind of within the county. York City is right in the center, so I have kind of the quadrant of West Manchester Township, Dover Township, and then most of Spring Grove area school district. We've been a growing population. We've added seats. Actually, the 196 district of which I represent came in from Philadelphia a couple years ago through redistricting because we gained more population. At that time, Philly was losing population. So it's a great area. Wonderful people. Very conservative district. I'm very blessed to have that. Born and raised here, graduate of York College, graduate of Spring Grove Area School District. Kids currently live in Dover, so kids currently go to Dover School District. So it's a great place to raise a family. We have more guns per capita than a lot of the country. So it's a great place. I love it.
That's fantastic, and it definitely. I mean, it's awesome to hear somebody who's really been in the district and knows the population and just really knows what's going on. I asked you to come on today because the state government committee, of which you are the chair, has really been doing a fantastic job looking at what happened over the course of the last election. Both leading into it from legal changes, both legislatively, and then some of the stuff that was imposed by the Supreme Court and the Secretary of State, and then trying to figure out what changes need to be made in order to have a better process, or a process that people can be more confident in the next election cycle. So I guess for starters, could you walk us through a little bit of what some of the timeline was for the changes that happened prior to the election?
Yeah, so this all started going back to Jill Stein's presidential run in 2016. After she lost, she filed suit in several states. One of them was Pennsylvania, that she didn't like our voting system and we didn't have a post-election audit process that she liked. So she sued us. The Wolf administration ended up signing an agreement with Jill Stein and the Green Party. I guess it was mostly Jill Stein. And in that did two things. Number one, it created the complete decertification of all of our election machines in the Commonwealth, and then required the state to look at a new post-election audit process. So obviously the first thing that happened was governor came out and decided to decertify all the election machines in the state. There were counties that just purchased new ones. We had counties that were looking at getting new ones. So counties were kind of all over the place on new election machines. But that was the catalyst for everything that transpired on elections last session. From there, we had how are we going to fund it? Governor Wolf came up with, we're going to give like $60 million, a small amount of money to help counties pay for it. We got some money from the feds, and then we ended up covering about probably 50% of the cost. The feds, I think, were around 10%, and the counties funded the rest. So the general election of 2019, most counties had the new machines already present. Some counties didn't even need to do new ones. So Lancaster County, they ended up not really needing to get new machines, but they did some updates and some upgrades. Here in York, we got all new voting machines. We went from touchscreen, which everybody loved, to the paper ballot, at which time I even quipped. It felt like I was putting my ballot into a giant shredding machine. And that's what happens, right? So that led to some elections changes within Act 77. The counties have been asking for some updates for a number of years. And you got to remember, our base election law was put into place in 1937. not a lot of that law has changed. So there's really some old, antiquated stuff. So one is daylight savings time. We have 2 elections a year. One of those elections is done by daylight savings time, which means actually one of the elections is illegally run because it's not run on daylight savings time. But that's part of the law. My favorite though, is it requires the counties to give each precinct a lantern or other lighting equipment. I've been, since I was 18, I've been voting. I've yet to see a lantern outside of a polling place, which is, it's dumb to have in there, but it's still in there, so you still have those old antiquated laws from 1937. And from what we found is a lot of gray area, and gray area in law allows outside organizations, the Secretary of State, and the PA Supreme Court room to create havoc and chaos within those gray areas. So we have a lot of work cut out for us trying to go in and clean out all the gray area. Even one of our hearings, we had a secretary from Ohio, even he said, listen, get rid of all your gray area. You need to tell them, the Department of State and Counties, exactly what they need to do and when they need to do it. Like, don't be up in the air on it, right? Just tell them how you want it done and have them go do it. So that's probably the number one thing we've heard throughout the hearings is how much gray area we have. The other is it's the wild, wild west between the counties. There's no standardization. Even the counties want more standardization. From post-election audits, how you handle curing of ballots, how you handle pre-canvassing, all of that, counties are doing their own thing, which shouldn't be the way. Like, if you're a voter in Pennsylvania, no matter what polling place you should walk into, you should have the same process. Now, the general setup might look different based on the facility in use, but you should have a general expectation of how that election is going to run. And we don't have that in Pennsylvania. So it's been good to have the hearings, because you hear a lot of the stuff that we haven't heard. Because listen, we have all the affidavits. We've heard what we've heard. It's been all televised. These hearings are geared towards the stuff is the deep dive, the stuff we haven't heard. Those intricate details that are so important in statute to improve the law moving forward. And I got to admit, out of the 4 hearings out of the 14 we're having on election reform, just last week's hearing on voter registration, I came out with there's at least 12 legislative changes we need to make out of one hearing. So it is, our election law has been ignored. The process has been ignored. And it's our job to clean it up, not ignore it anymore, because it's so critically important on a number of levels. And our goal is to get it right. We want to be Florida. 2000 Florida was a mess. 2020 Florida, smoothest election they've ever had. So that is our goal.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point as far as how the law and the gray area ends up really empowering the executive branch and the judicial branch. So when we take a look at some of these changes that you're talking about, and I know that there's a lot of complaints from people, and one of the things that people talk about quite frequently is the lack of access by like election monitors actually come in post-election while the counting is happening. So is that something? And I mean, people point to, obviously Philadelphia is the whipping boy on a lot of these, a lot of these problems, where we have other counties are, very transparent. You can, as an election monitor, you're in there afterwards. You're able to watch what's happening. Whereas in Philadelphia, it the way it's portrayed, and I know, depending on what news you're watching, this is either a problem or it's absolutely not a problem. But, if you don't have the ability to go in or have an outside observer come in and actually see what's happening, that diminishes people's confidence in the process.
Mm-hmm.
So is that one of these gray areas where you have counties, like York County or some of the other counties who are like, look, come in, watch what we're doing. We have a cordon. You can't come past this point, but you don't need binoculars to watch what we're actually doing. So is
Right.
that one of the gray area issues, and is that something that can be addressed statutorily, or what is the problem there?
Yeah, that is a gray issue area because there's no consistency between counties. The law really doesn't provide a lot of clear and concise direction for counties how to handle observers. And then you had the entire COVID social distancing, which allowed counties to come back and say, well, because of COVID, we're going to have to keep everybody away from each other. So you need to clarify that moving forward. So observers should be within eyesight of the ballots. I think that should be the expectation. Like you should be able to see those ballots being done moving forward. You can use technology. A lot of counties utilized live streaming that is kept because there's a requirement to keep all this stuff for 22 months. So videotaping all those actions between the counties, because obviously you might, a observer even might go talk to another observer for a little bit, look away, having that constant look at those ballots. And I would go back to, casino gambling. I mean, there's probably more security at a casino watching the card dealers on a day-to-day basis than necessarily handling of ballots. So making sure there's tight security and, again, continuity. Observers shouldn't be treated differently in Philadelphia than they are in Erie or Allegheny or York or Lancaster or Greene County. You should have that same expectation of access moving forward. So making sure they're and they shouldn't interfere either. Like, they're there to observe, to take notes, to report. That's an important aspect, but they shouldn't be interfering either. So we need to clarify that. And probably the best example of a gray area I can give you. If you go back and listen to the first hearing on election guidance, big issue with election guidance, right? We have all these new directives coming out from the Department of State. You have guidance, and then you have directives, right? Guidance, recommendations, directives, mandate. Directives come from statutory law, but apparently court cases are still a guidance, even though they act as law. We need to clarify that as well, because that's crazy. Secretary Bookvar, and this is how we got drop boxes. There's a provision in law that allows election offices to set up satellite offices. Now, satellite office would be to handle voter registration, that kind of stuff. They're not polling places.
Right.
But she took guidance based on that law to create drop boxes, mobile drop boxes, because there was a nonprofit that spent money in Delaware County to hire election officials to go mobile with absentee ballot applications and stuff like that. So they took what is not meant to be a polling location and turned it into a polling location via election guidance. Now, if you also hear that, you'll hear Secretary Bookvar repeatedly say, "I felt."
Right.
You have an administrator who's supposed to abide by the Constitution and the statute. Like, it's really easy. You read it. And by the way, and we had her testify this on the record, she's an election attorney. She's an attorney. She did a lot of election guidance. She's Secretary of State for a department that has not only their own general counsel, but God knows how many general counsels in the office of general counsel's office. Like, they have a lot of attorneys they can. She said, "I felt a lot," because she did not like the law. And her goal was to change the law the way she felt it needed to be changed through her guidance documents, to the point of she put out a guidance document so she could take it to the Supreme Court and get statutory changes. That's to the extent the Department of State and Secretary Bookvar went to manipulate this election through their guidance documents. And we saw it time and time again. So going back, and how do we fix that? How do we make sure that we don't have, because we've never had that circumstance. We've never had that politically engaged election official who went out of their way to dictate how election policy goes based on how they felt elections should be administered. So that's going to be a big fix to try to mitigate the Department of State guidance moving forward. We have some thoughts about how to do it and do it in a way that I think is going to bring standardization to the election process, continuity at the election process, both for the counties and at the precinct level. So we're really excited about that. But again, if we didn't have the hearing, we wouldn't have that testimony and that background.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, just to keep in mind that when you're dealing with an administrative and executive, appointee, the fact that there's that much latitude, and it doesn't matter which party's in control, whether you have a Republican
Right.
taking steps to change how the election is going, or you have a Democrat changing, how the election is operating. That's a problem, because you don't just want consistency between counties. You want to make sure that there is consistency between elections and consistency between administrations. So, being able to actually sit down and really have an in-depth look at what happened, and I'm, this is essentially a worst case scenario. You have someone who is from the executive branch who made a lot of decisions based on feeling versus statute. You had a Supreme Court who said those changes that she promulgated, that she said this is what we're going to do, those changes were fine based on vagaries of the law. They essentially found they worked backwards. From an outside perspective, the Supreme Court worked backwards. This is what we want to happen. This is, these are the steps she took to make that happen. So here's where the law says that she can do that. So I mean,
and even not to interrupt you, but even in the court cases, so we had one of the highest litigated elections ever here in Pennsylvania, right? Talking with election attorneys who brought a lot of these issues into court. So the observers, a lot of the judges came back with, listen, no harm, no foul. It's not really a big deal. Let's just move on. We're not interested in quote disenfranchisement, even though the election law is pretty clear. Like it's fairly clear. If you want to drive out the clarity in it, you should allow election observers to view the ballots. Like having them use binoculars to view ballots is far outside the scope of what that law calls for. But generally, the courts were okay saying no harm, no foul. So you weren't getting those court cases. I mean, listen, Secretary Bookvar, to this day, so if your ballot came in, because there was that court ruling, right, that they would accept mail-in ballots that were postmarked election day or prior and came in after 8 p.m. on election day, right? They're there. So part of those ballots were counted. So at the state level, all those votes were counted. At the federal level, they weren't counted. And the secretary was clear. She's like, listen, the counting, not counting them at the federal level wouldn't change the outcome of any election. I would agree with that statement. Here's the problem. They also counted all those votes as counted, and it was about 10,000. That could have had a direct impact at the state level, right, for the Brewster Senate seat. And again, that's a disenfranchisement of electors. You had people that legally voted in state elections and were disenfranchised against voting in federal elections. Now, I think Alito's order was pretty clear. You collect the ballots and you segregate them. He never said vote them. Right. Never once in Alito's order did he say vote those ballots. So now you have the secretary interpreting what a U.S. Supreme Court justice said. I mean, think about the arrogance of that. Like, what did Rehnquist, like, I can't fathom the arrogance of someone to say, listen, I know what Alito wanted. He wanted the federal ballots not counted, but the state ballots he totally wanted. And that's the frustrating part we got. And again, where are the courts? No harm, no foul. It's cool. But that potentially had a direct impact on a state election. Yeah. That was very, very, very narrow.
So I guess moving forward, there were a lot of problems that people can point to. moving forward, I know that you said that there are 14 hearings. You've done 4 of them already, or okay.
Yep.
So are there going to be legislative fixes that come out along the course of the hearings, or is everything going to come out all at once? And I ask that because one of the things we hear about most frequently from people is the issue of drop boxes in particular. Governor Wolf is not going to sign a law that eliminates drop boxes, and that's so. Knowing that, sometimes politics is the art of the possible, are we going to be able to look at the issue of drop boxes and say, well, and the Democrats aren't going to vote to overturn a veto? I get it. Are we going to be able to look at, okay, here's this thing that was created, these drop boxes. Pennsylvania law doesn't allow us to do ballot harvesting, right? So legally, you are not allowed to drop off, really anything other than your own ballot. But practically, because these drop boxes have no supervision, you have the ability to collect as many ballots as you want and drop them off, and there's nobody there to stop you. So going into this next election, I mean, that's a recognizable problem. Going into particularly the primary, are we going to have some solutions to some of these discrete things that we can point to and say, okay, this is a problem. We know this is a problem. Here's a solution to it. Or is the legislature's going to just wait until we're done and compile everything into one bill? What's the going forward? How's this going to work?
Yeah. So as far as timeline goes, you'll see more and more bills getting introduced over the next weeks, because after every hearing there's, we got to fix this. So we're as we're going through and setting up hearings, we're trying to get those bills drafted and out, to kind of give people a clear picture of where we're going moving forward. I know drop boxes is a major concern. The easy way of doing that is just saying, listen, if you're handling ballots, you have to treat it as a polling place. So you have to have all of the protections a polling place does for the drop boxes moving forward. And there's some other thoughts about that too. Like you can hand your ballot in at the polling place itself. Because remember last time, a bunch of people didn't realize that they hit that permanent list, and probably we're going to get rid of that permanent list because that's going to save counties a lot of headaches, and I think voters a lot of headaches, because then they don't have to worry if they were sent a ballot, they signed up in the primary, accidentally clicked that permanent ballot status, they were sent one in the general election, they didn't want one in the general election, so they go up to the poll and the polling says you already voted via mail-in, so too bad, you're going to have to do a provincial. Allow them just to take their ballot back to their precinct. You can take to the voter election office, you can take it back to the precinct. That way you don't have to worry about spoilage of ballots and the whole 9 yards. You now can validate that person through your normal process and stuff. But I think doing a lockdown, we have a timing problem right now. So the counties are already involved in their election process. That timeline starts. That started probably middle of February. So doing any changes for the primary isn't going to be possible with our legislative timeline. So our goal is to get the fixes once the hearings are done. And again, I don't know if we're going to do multiple bills, one big one. That hasn't been decided yet. But target those bills. You look in May, June timeframe, effective for the general election coming up. That way it gives time for counties to implement. Because one of the other problem is if you do changes, counties do need time to administer and change them. And, we do need a better timeline of election for counties to make it more transparent and more open. And listen, I'm big in transparency. I think you're going to see legislation focused on maximum transparency. People should know who's voting and who voted. They should have an understanding of the post-election audits, and they should be actual audits. They should be checked, the paper ballot. They should be checked against the tabulation. If there were 50 Republican votes and 50 Democrat and 10 Star Wars party voters who voted for the Republican candidate, 50 for the Democrat candidate, and 10 for the Star Wars party candidate. At the end of the day, after the votes are tabulated, the post-election audit should come back and say, you know what? There were 50 for the Republicans, there were 50 for the Democrats, and there were 10 for the Star Wars party. And people should see that. It should be made transparent. Pre-election certification of the machines, they should run test ballots. They should run, 100 test ballots per machine. Put 50 Republican, 50 Democrat in those machines, and they should kick out 50 votes for Republicans, 50 votes for Democrats. And it should be public, and people should know about it ahead of time. That way, okay, all right, the machines are counting. We don't have to talk about algorithms. We don't have to talk about reallocating votes. We don't have to talk about any of that stuff. We know that my machines in my county are doing that, and I know machines in all 67 counties are tabulating correctly. And that's I think the greatest advantage to broadening the transparency. Making sure that we have real-time tracking of mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, the whole 9 yards. You should know how many were mailed every single day, how many came back every single day. You should know how many ballots there are. How many total ballots are there that were printed for each precinct and each county, right? And you should see a statewide total. And at the end of the day, all this should be auditable and it should make sense. You shouldn't have any issues of saying, well, there were 100,000 ballots and we only got 20,000 back, or there are 100,000 ballots and we got 120,000 ballots back, right? It should just be, here's all the data, go tear it apart, and we're going to audit the crap out of it at the end of the day. And those are the kind of provisions we really need to build in law that I think we're going to really drive the integrity and the trust and rebuild trust in our election process moving forward. Because remember, trust in elections isn't a Republican thing in 2020. It was a Democrat thing in 2016. And we need to remember that. And that's why the feds pass a bunch of laws. We're doing new requirements on election machines as well. So this isn't a Republican thing. This is a Republican and Democrat thing over the past 2 federal elections where both parties did not trust the outcome of the election and want to see changes. Which I think we can and will deliver for them.
Yeah, I think it's important to have a realistic understanding of what's possible and what the timeline is actually going to allow for. And I think that the fact that the state government committee, and there are other committees and intergovernmental operations stuff, and there's a lot of people looking at what happened with the election. And I think the fact that that you are taking such a deep look at this is really important. And I know that people don't have the time necessarily to tune in individually and watch 14 hearings.
They should. They're great.
They are.
I also get it.
Yeah, but I appreciate the fact that you are taking such a serious look at this, and it isn't a rehash of what we've seen on the news and everything like that, because there's a lot of noise versus a lot of okay, these are things that we can actually do something about. So I want to thank you for taking the time to do that. And I know that the folks who are, not only our supporters, but voters in general who have had concerns are really, they want to know that their vote counts, that what's happening is really, that their voice is actually being heard, that it's not just getting lost in an algorithm or in a voting machine.
Right.
So is there anything else that people should be aware of as the process move forward? We're almost out of time, but I want to make sure that we've kind of gotten through as much as we can.
Yeah, and through this process, I think the General Assembly needs to do some internal changes about how we operate. Number one, the fact that we're doing this deep dive, and you probably don't need to do necessarily 14 hearings for every law, but we have a lot of laws out there that need maintenance, and we've ignored our election law for decades. completely ignored it because we were scared. I think we're scared to touch it. Oh, if we open up the election law, what are we going to have to deal with, right? But committees need to do more oversight. They need to drag administrators in and say, we pass, even new laws, we passed the law. How did you implement it? What issues did you have implementing it? What changes? Bring in individuals who have to deal with that law. What were your outcomes of dealing with that law? And what we're doing now is probably something we should do every session, is come back and ask counties and citizens, how did you like the elections? Were there any changes we need to do? And that's what we've seen from other states. Florida took 20 years to get to a point of a flawless election. And guess what? They're doing more reforms because it wasn't a 2001, 2002, hey, we did reforms, we're done. They constantly looked at it. They were vigilant in their oversight hearings, and they were vigilant in taking on policy to change it. And that's, I fully believe, the direction the legislative branch needs to go. Less movement of bills, more focus on policy. And guess what? If you focus on those oversight hearings, you will get better policy that improves Pennsylvania moving forward. Because if you remember, all those election changes, we didn't do a hearing. There wasn't one hearing on Act 77, Act 12, anything. We made changes kind of in a vacuum, and look at the result we got. This session, new kind of general in charge of election stuff here, and I want to make sure we get it right. So we're going to have a robust conversation. We're going to figure out as many problems as we can, and we're going to try to get the best fix to make sure that it's not the process that picks our winners and losers, but the voters. And I'll tell you what, Republican, or I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, if all said is all said and done, if you have an equal process that's uniform across the state, I think Republicans and conservatives win more often than not because we have a better product and a better policy than what the Democrats are offering. So if we have equality and a process that allows voters to pick, more times those voters will pick Republicans, and we see it in other states.
Well, again, thanks very much for taking time out of your day today. I appreciate it. I think that, when we have the opportunity to, as this is going forward, I would definitely like to have you on again, just to give people an update so they get an understanding of where things are going and what else has been learned.
Absolutely.
Everybody, thanks for tuning in today. I look forward to seeing you next week. Representative Grove, thanks for coming on. It was fantastic to have you.